Thanks, Damien. Yes, so as Damien said, I was on my GFP. I am still on my GFP, and my suit, business shirts and ties are also on a GFP, but we're not in the same location. So I have to thank Nigel Corrie for lending me his shirt and tie. Thank you very much. And as some colleagues of mine, Jesse Moody and Joe Mendez said, and Bear Grylls, as Nuffielders, we have to improvise, adapt and overcome. So we'll try and do that today for you. All right, so as Nigel said, I'm supported by the South Australian Nuffield alumni, so I'm very much appreciative of them allowing me to do this study, and also, of course, Nuffield Australia. Also have to thank my father. He was very useful for me while I was away travelling, on my personal travels. He looked after all my vines, and he had some personal issues to deal with, so I'm very much appreciative of what he's been able to do for me while I've been romping around the world. I'd just like to say that, yeah, I'm in Clare Valley, a small town called Auburn, and we're on Nudgee country out there, so pay respect to the Nudgee people. All right. So a bit of background on me. I got into the wine industry about 20 years ago. I lived on a property in the Barossa Valley for about 9 years, then moved down here to Tassie in the Huon Valley and spent about 10 years down there. I've also worked throughout Germany, Spain, Greece and Cyprus. And I've always had an interest in lesser known varieties and particularly drought tolerant grape varieties as well. One of my ultimate goals was to try and grow grapes without water, which, as we know, can be a bit of a challenge at the moment. With the interest in less common varieties, when I started studying, the thing I noticed mostly straight up was that there were 6 main varieties: Shiraz, Cabernet, Chardonnay, probably the top 3, and then things like Riesling and Pinot Noir, which is what mostly has been growing in Australia. And the issues recently with oversupply have come from those 6 varieties, particularly in the Riverland region, so with Chardonnay, Shiraz and Cabernet Sauvignon. So as part of an adaptation process, we need to start looking at different varieties and stop growing industrial quantities of those varieties as a commodity and look to produce lesser known varieties as a product. So with that interest, it led me into doing a PhD back in 2017, and I was looking at 2 varieties from Cyprus. So you can see on the far left there is a typical vineyard in Cyprus with the stepped vineyard there, and then in the middle and on the right we have the 2 varieties that I imported. One of them was a white variety called Xynisteri, and on the right was a red variety called Maratheftico. So both those varieties are really drought hardy. They were grown in their 2nd year in the ground. Typically you're looking at 3 to 4 years before you're getting a good harvest of grapevines. And the studies we did with those 2 varieties, we found the roots were 3 to 4 times bigger than things like Shiraz and Cabernet Sauvignon, so they were very drought tolerant. So why wine grape varieties from the Eastern Mediterranean? Well, we all know it's becoming hotter and drier, so we need to start looking for less import-intensive varieties that better suit our changing conditions, better suit the conditions and changing consumers as well in Australia. Currently, most of the varieties that are grown in Australia, as I mentioned, the Shiraz, Cabernet and the like, they originate from France and Germany, and traditionally they're a cooler climate and they have plenty of water. So not ideal in the long term to be grown in South Australia in particular. So you basically have 2 options then. So you can either do as I did, move location and come down to Tassie, or you can start to look for varieties that will tolerate those conditions better. So back in 21, 22, decided to go back to South Australia and put my research money where my mouth was and start to cultivate these varieties. So most of South Australia's vineyards are at a latitude of 35 degrees south, and one option is to look for climate-matched varieties from 35 degrees north, which is what I set out to do. So 35 degrees north, we're looking at countries like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, southern Greece, Crete, Cyprus, Malta, southern Turkey, Syria and Lebanon. I arrived in Cyprus on the 3rd of October, so shortly after that it became impossible to go to Israel and Lebanon. So as a result, I spent a bit more time in Malta and also went to Italy to the FAO. All right, so from those 4 regions, there's over 1,500 Indigenous varieties that exist there and are grown in lesser or greater quantities. From those varieties, I spoke with people, visited vineyards, and I found 70 what I considered excellent candidates, and then tried to narrow that down to a top 10, which was pretty difficult. So on the far left there's a vineyard in Crete, and you can see you've got olive trees grown in amongst them, and goats are quite common on Crete as well. But you can see the soil is very rocky and doesn't look like it supports much life. So on the far right there, we've got a vineyard in Cyprus, and that's some of the grapes they're growing there. Okay, so what were the outcomes? Initially, what I concluded was the Australian industry needs to increase its grape and wine varieties. So, as I mentioned, we're quite narrow in the varieties of grapes that we're growing, and we need to try and expand that, especially white grapes, because at the moment there's an oversupply of red grapes, and the interest in white grapes is growing. Recent research has also shown that younger consumers want more white wines, and they're not afraid to try different and unusual varieties. And they're also looking more and more towards no and low alcohol wines, and they don't like overly acidic wines such as Riesling, which is a little bit different to what older consumers are interested in. As I said, I've identified a large number of potential varieties that would be suitable for cultivation right now, and those varieties I looked at all had moderate alcohol levels and also moderate levels of acidity as well. So yes, as I said, I had a bit of time because I wasn't able to go to Israel, so I was fortunate enough to go to the UN, to the FAO, met Sue McCluskey there as well briefly, and the key take-home from that meeting was the importance of new breeding techniques, NBTs, or gene editing. With gene editing, it'd be possible to increase breeding, make new clones that are disease and drought resistant, and even cross varieties to make new varieties and potentially new Australian varieties as well. The only problem with that is at the moment in Australia, gene editing with CRISPR technology is considered akin to GMO, which it isn't, which makes it banned under Australian food and food standards. So that's something that needs work, and part of my outcomes was that we need to look at lobbying the government to get that change. GMOs and gene editing are two very different things. So I was very interested in what Sue had to say about the term symbio, something like that, that she mentioned in her talk. Okay. All right, so these were my top 10. One really interesting thing I found was there was a recent study showing that phonetic spelling of unusual variety names on wine labels can reduce consumer hesitancy and act as an educational tool. So as you can see, the varieties I selected aren't very easy for Australians or English-speaking people to come across, but potentially with the new phonetic spelling, that helps them feel more at ease when they're ordering wines in a restaurant or buying wines at a winery or in a cellar door. So just as an example, I'll run through. So we've got Moricanella, Iannudi, Gigantina, Gelveza, Savatiano, Vradiano, Vidiano, Mandellari, Narenja, and this one's hard, Kustevik. All right, final recommendation. So, as it says there, really the industry, the wine industry needs to look at establishing a comprehensive, accessible national grape collection vineyard and database so producers can access that and choose some varieties and then go on to grow them. Before we get to that stage, though, we need to look at importing more varieties and test them in small-scale vineyards to make sure that they're suitable for the region, and then grow those varieties in different regions to make sure, again, that they're suitable to the conditions of those regions. As I mentioned, it'd be good to embrace NBTs for new clones and potentially new varieties as well, and educate the community about their safety. If we develop new varieties, in the past it's been done by CSIRO, but they were given inauthentic names that didn't really resonate with consumers. So they were like faux Italian and French names. And I think I can only think of one that's still around now, and it was called Sienna. We need to have ongoing consumer research to make sure we're making wines that younger consumers want to buy. And what we know from studies is that younger consumers, they don't want to drink what their parents have been drinking. They're looking for fresh white wines, not heavy red wines. So we need to concentrate on developing wines that suit the younger consumer if we want to target them to grow the industry. So just quickly, running out of time, the use of lesser known varieties in NBTs has the potential to improve the industry. Ongoing search for funding to conduct those small-scale studies is difficult to come by, particularly in this current economy. I've been applying madly for funding through Wine Australia and the Future Drought Fund, not having a lot of success with that. So I'm currently looking for alternative funding opportunities, so if anyone's got any ideas, please come and talk to me in the break. Thank you.